Ladies and gentlemen, let me make something very clear from the beginning. You can't heal what you won't face. You can't grow past what you won't admit. And you will never, hear me, you will never walk in the fullness of who you were called to be until you face the truth about your mother. I know that's heavy. I know it might make some of you uncomfortable, but healing doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes wrapped in truth. So let's go there. Your mother was your first blueprint for how the world works. Before you learned language, before you had conscious thought, you were already receiving signals from her, signals about safety, love, acceptance, and identity. She was the first voice you ever heard, the first touch you ever felt, and whether she meant to or not, she became the foundation upon which you started building your internal architecture. Every child is born reaching for love, for validation, for connection, and for better or worse, your mother was the one you reached for first. And if what you reached for wasn't there, or if what was there came with strings, conditions, or even pain, then you began learning how to contort yourself to survive. That's not something you remember. It's something your nervous system remembers. It got wired into you. The way you respond to rejection, the way you shrink when someone disapproves, the way you overextend yourself to be accepted, the way you stay quiet to avoid conflict, or maybe how you fight to be seen and heard. So much of that didn't start with your adult experiences. It started with emotional blueprint you received before you even knew who you were, and it's not about blaming her. This isn't about vilifying your mother. It's about recognizing that what you experienced shaped you whether you were aware of it or not. You were taught what love looks like based on how she gave it, or withheld it. You learned whether or not you were safe to express yourself based on how she responded to your feelings. You learned what it meant to be a man or a woman by how she treated you or by how she allowed herself to be treated. And those lessons didn't stay in childhood. They followed you into adulthood, into your relationships, into your parenting, into your leadership, into your business, and into your spiritual life. That's why some of you keep chasing achievements but still feel unworthy. That's why no matter how much money you make, there's still a voice in your head saying, it's not enough, or you're not enough, because your first understanding of enough came from whether or not you felt emotionally full in her presence. That's why some of you shut down when conflict arises. It's not just because you don't like confrontation. It's because as a child, conflict may have meant danger, shame, punishment, or abandonment. You carry these patterns like invisible armor. Some of it helped you survive, but now that you're grown, now that you want to thrive, those same patterns are keeping you stuck. You're still trying to be good enough for a woman who may not have known how to love herself, let alone you. You're still seeking validation from others because you never felt seen by the one person who was supposed to see you without effort. And again, this is not about judgment. Your mother may have done her best. She may have had a story of her own, wounds you never knew about, pain she never healed from, trauma she never processed. But listen, just because someone did their best doesn't mean their best didn't leave a scar. And pretending that scar isn't there doesn't make it heal. It keeps it hidden, and what stays hidden stays powerful. Until you bring it into the light, until you acknowledge that the way you were parented still echoes in the way you live, until you tell the truth about how that blueprint was laid down in your soul, you will continue to build your life on top of unresolved pain. And unresolved pain does not stay quiet. It shows up, it leaks, it gets louder, it sabotages. It creates cycles and patterns you can't break because you're still living in a story that began before you had the words to write your own. Your mother had a position in your life that no one else could occupy. She was the first authority figure, the first nurturer, the first protector, and whether she lived up to that or failed to, the position itself carried weight. The title of mother comes loaded with expectation, and when those expectations aren't met, The wound left behind cuts deeper than almost any other. But here's where many people get stuck. You confuse the position with the person. You assume that because someone held the sacred role of mother, they should have automatically embodied the character, the care, and the wisdom that the role requires. But a title doesn't make someone whole. A title doesn't make someone healed. A title doesn't erase their past. Your mother was a person before she was your parent, and unless you learn to separate who she was from the role she played, you will stay emotionally entangled in a web of expectations, disappointments, guilt, and confusion. That confusion keeps people stuck. It keeps you from seeing her humanity, but even more dangerously, it keeps you from understanding your own story clearly. Some people spend their entire lives defending their mother's honor while secretly breaking under the weight of unspoken pain. They tell themselves, she did her best, or she had it worse than me, or she meant well. And while those things may be true, they can also become shields that protect you from facing what's still unhealed. Because the moment you start to acknowledge that the person who held the most sacred position in your life may have also been the source of deep hurt, something in you feels disloyal. You feel like you're betraying her by speaking the truth. You feel like you're wrong for being angry, for feeling let down, for questioning the things you were taught. But your healing is not an act of betrayal. It's an act of responsibility. It's an act of clarity. It's an act of choosing truth over comfort, growth over silence, and freedom over loyalty to dysfunction. And that clarity begins when you stop trying to protect the image of your mother and start trying to protect the wholeness of your soul. Some mothers were loving but passive. Some were strong but emotionally unavailable. Some were kind but inconsistent. Some were present physically but absent emotionally. And some caused harm not out of cruelty, but out of ignorance, brokenness, and survival instincts they picked up long before you were born. When you begin to see that she didn't just raise you, she was still in the process of raising herself, you start to understand why certain needs were never met. But that understanding doesn't erase the impact. Knowing that your mother was broken doesn't break the parts of you that were shaped by her brokenness. It doesn't change the fact that you had to grow up too fast, that you had to carry emotions too heavy for your age, that you were sometimes the emotional adult in the room while she was still trapped in her own unresolved pain. This isn't about making her the villain. This is about telling the truth so you can stop being the victim. Because when you can finally say, my mother was a person with limitations, pain, and flaws, and I was affected by that, you begin to take your power back. You stop needing her to change in order for you to be free. You stop waiting for an apology that may never come. You stop demanding justice from someone who doesn't have the capacity to give it. You start healing because you start owning your story, not from a place of blame, but from a place of responsibility and revelation. When you confuse the person with the position, you give away your clarity. And clarity is the beginning of power. Clarity is what allows you to forgive without pretending nothing happened. Clarity is what lets you love someone from a distance without feeling guilty. Clarity is what helps you draw boundaries without shame. And until you have the clarity to say, she was my mother, but she was also a wounded woman, you will keep carrying wounds that don't even belong to you. You will keep trying to prove your worth to someone who may never have known how to see it. You will keep shrinking in your own life, subconsciously afraid of outgrowing the one person you were trained to keep pleasing. But when you see her clearly, you begin to see yourself clearly. When you separate her identity from her role, you begin to reclaim your own. You begin to let go of the guilt. You begin to let go of the fantasy. You begin to make peace with the past without needing to rewrite it. And that is the first real step toward emotional liberation, the kind of freedom that comes when truth is more important than image, when your healing matters more than your history, and when you decide that telling the truth about your story is not dishonor, it's deliverance. Some of you are terrified to face the truth because you're afraid that if you let yourself feel the pain, it will swallow you whole. You think that if you unlock that door, everything behind it will flood your life and drown the version of you you've carefully built. You've been surviving by staying numb. You've been holding it together by pushing it down. You've learned to function while fractured, to succeed while silently suffering. You tell yourself it's in the past, that it doesn't matter now, that you're too grown for that old pain to still have power. But here's the reality. What you refuse to face will continue to follow you. It will show up in how you love, how you lead, how you parent, how you trust, and how you see yourself. The pain you bury doesn't die. It leaks. It disguises itself as anger, perfectionism, anxiety, people, pleasing, emotional distance, or constant striving. It becomes your operating system, silently running in the background of your life, affecting everything while you pretend it's not there, but you will never heal until you allow yourself to sit with what you've spent your life trying to outrun. Healing doesn't begin when things get easier. Healing begins when you stop avoiding the truth. That means you have to look directly at the part of you that still aches when you think about what you didn't get. You have to acknowledge the disappointment that still lingers, even if you've tried to convince yourself that it doesn't matter anymore. You have to admit that something in you still wants to be seen, still wants to be chosen, still wants to be loved the way you needed back then. This doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. It makes you human, and real healing only happens when honesty meets compassion. You don't have to stay stuck in bitterness, but you do have to pass through the territory of truth. You can't just skip to forgiveness. You can't just slap a positive mindset over emotional abandonment. You can't spiritualize your way around the damage that was done when you were too small to understand it and too young to defend yourself. And you don't heal by pretending you're unaffected. You heal by allowing yourself to grieve the mother you needed, but never had. Grief is not about wallowing in sadness. It's about releasing what's been trapped in silence. It's about telling the truth about what you lost, even if no one else acknowledges it. Some of you are grieving a mother who was physically present but emotionally absent. Some are grieving a mother who was never safe to run to. Some are grieving the love that was only offered on condition. If you were quiet enough, successful enough, obedient enough, that grief is not petty, it's not excessive, it's necessary, because until you feel it, you can't free it. Until you honor the pain, you can't move through it. And if you don't move through it, you will carry it into every corner of your life, wondering why things don't change even though you're doing all the right. Things facing the pain doesn't mean you get stuck in it. It means you finally get to move through it. It means you stop being afraid of your own story. It means you stop needing to defend someone else's version of events just to keep the peace. You don't heal by minimizing what hurt you. You heal by giving it a name, giving it space, giving it voice. That's where power begins, not in pretending you're over it, but in choosing to deal with it head on. That's where you reclaim the parts of yourself you had to hide to survive. That's where you reconnect with the younger version of you who was never the problem, who never deserved the silence, the shame, or the pressure. You face the pain so you don't become it, because if you don't deal with it, you'll pass it on. If you don't interrupt the pattern, you'll repeat it. If you don't break the silence will break you. But when you turn toward what you feared, when you look at the wound without flinching, that's when healing becomes possible. That's when change becomes real. That's when freedom stops being an idea and becomes your new reality, because you chose truth over protection, growth over guilt, and restoration over repression. You can't go back, and rewrite your childhood. You can't go back and make your mother show up differently. You can't reach into the past and give yourself the love, the safety, the presence, or the validation that was missing. But what you can do is decide what happens next. You can decide how the story continues. You can choose whether the pain becomes a prison or a platform. You can choose whether the past defines your identity or refines your purpose. Because once you face the truth, once you sit with the discomfort, once you grieve what was lost and own what was learned, you earn the right to rewrite the narrative, not the facts, but the meaning. You get to say, that happened, but it doesn't own me. That shaped me, but it doesn't define me. That hurt me, but it doesn't have to hold me hostage anymore. That's when you start reclaiming your power. That's when you stop waiting for closure from people who can't even give you accountability. That's when you stop needing someone else to validate your experience in order for it to be real. There's something transformative that happens when you stop asking why she didn't love you the way you needed and start asking what kind of love you now choose to give yourself. Because the most powerful shift is when you stop being the child looking for healing and become the adult creating it. When you stop reliving the story through pain and start telling it through purpose. When you stop waiting for someone to rescue you and realize you've always had the power to redeem what you've lived through. That redemption doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like setting boundaries that once terrified you. Sometimes it looks like forgiving her, not to excuse what happened, but to release yourself from the emotional contract that's been draining you for years. Sometimes it looks like letting go of the fantasy version of the mother you kept hoping would appear one day and learning how to accept the truth without bitterness when you rewrite the narrative. You stop trying to change the past and start building the future. You stop seeing yourself as someone who was broken by her, and you start seeing yourself as someone who was forged in the fire. You stop asking why it happened and start asking what you're going to do with it now. And the moment you take ownership of your healing, you break the cycle. Because you're no longer waiting for her to show up. You're showing up for yourself. You're becoming the person you needed. You're becoming emotionally whole so you don't raise your children in the shadow of your unmet needs. You're becoming emotionally honest so you don't keep performing wellness while hiding wounds. You're becoming emotionally responsible so that the dysfunction ends with you, not because it didn't affect you, but because you had the courage to confront it and the wisdom to transform it. Rewriting the narrative doesn't mean denying what happened. It means reframing what it means. It means saying, yes, I was wounded, but I am not powerless. Yes, I was overlooked, but I am not invisible. Yes, I had to grow up with gaps in my heart, but those gaps have now become places where grace and wisdom live. You stop looking back in anger and start looking forward with intention. You begin to understand that healing isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's connected to your life. It's about the legacy you're creating with your choices. Because every time you speak the truth, every time you choose self-respect, every time you love without manipulation, you are building something new. You're creating a new pattern. You're establishing a new foundation. You're becoming someone who can lead with clarity, love with depth, and live with peace. Not because your mother finally changed, but because you did. Because you took the fragments of what wasn't given and used them to build something unshakable. That's what it means to reclaim your power. That's what it means to be free. That's what it means to write a story where pain no longer gets the final word. So here's the truth. You will never heal. You will never lead with wholeness. You will never become who you were born to be until you face what your relationship with your mother planted in your soul. You're not doing this to blame. You're not doing this to shame. You're doing this to be free. And freedom is never found in fantasy. It's found in facing the truth, no matter how hard, no matter how deep. So go there. Cry if you need to. Forgive if you're ready to. But face it, because your future depends on it.